Today, I'm unpacking fascinating research on how boredom and attachment anxiety work together to shape fear of missing out. And the effects aren't the same for everyone, so be sure to watch till the end to learn how this boredom and attachment dynamic fuels the fear of missing out. Most research tells us fear of missing out is related to anxiety or depression, but that explanation is incomplete, because plenty of anxious or depressed people don't constantly feel like they're missing out. So today in Social Psychology Now, we're diving into a 2020 paper that asks a deeper question. Why are some people especially vulnerable to fear of missing out? Specifically, we'll explore how attachment anxiety, boredom proneness, and negative emotional states work together to shape fear of missing out. This is my most cited paper, which I published in Computers and Human Behavior during the pandemic. I didn't know it at the time, but this was the first of many fear of missing out papers that I would author. If you'd like a free copy of the paper, feel free to post a comment below and I will see that you get a copy to that paper. Let's break down this paper starting with the theory. The theoretical underpinnings of fear of missing out is that we experience it when we have unwanted psychological needs, with a special focus on social needs. For a more comprehensive review of this theory, you can click on this video here. So fear of missing out is defined as the apprehension that others are having rewarding experiences without you. Social media didn't create fear of missing out, but it's often believed that it amplified it. For the first time in human history, we're constantly exposed to curated highlights of other people's lives, while in prior years we just simply went on with our day without really knowing what other people were doing. Prior research shows that fear of missing out is related to higher anxiety and depression, lower life satisfaction, sleep problems, and problematic social media and smartphone use. But here's the problem. Not everyone with anxiety or depression experiences fear of missing out at the same intensity. So what explains the differences? Here's a few things that we thought that would make an impact on fear of missing out. Attachment theory suggests that early relationships shape how we relate to others later in life. People high in attachment anxiety, they fear abandonment, they doubt their own worth, they're hypervigilant to social rejection, as well as they monitor others closely for signs of exclusion. From an attachment perspective, fear of missing out looks a lot like social abandonment playing out online. And if you'd like more information about this specific attachment style known as preoccupied attachment, click on this link here. It's important to note with boredom proneness that boredom isn't just having nothing to do. It is the inability to find cognitive or emotional satisfaction. So for example, people such as myself don't really have to do a lot to be cognitively or emotionally satisfied. I can turn on a UND hockey game on a Friday or Saturday night and I'm very entertained. Whereas other people, they have other cognitive needs that maybe they have to go to a karaoke bar and sing the newest Chapel Roan song. People are very different, and that's what makes psychology very exciting. People high in boredom proneness experience more mind wandering, ruminate more, seek stimulation, often through social media. The authors of this paper propose something important. Maybe boredom creates the mental space where attachment anxiety fuels fear of missing out. This leads us to the central question of the study. Here for the hypotheses, I'm depicting a structural equation model. In this model, we outline multiple hypotheses. First, we hypothesized that anxiety and depression would predict boredom proneness. From there, we expected that boredom proneness would predict attachment anxiety would predict fear of missing out, and boredom proneness would predict fear of missing out. Next, we had multiple mediational hypotheses. First, that boredom proneness would mediate the relationship of both anxiety and depression with fear of missing out. Secondly, that attachment anxiety would mediate the relationship between boredom proneness and fear of missing out. For those wondering what mediation is, I can explain. In statistics, mediation helps us answer a really important question, not whether two variables are related, but how they're related. A mediator is a variable that sits in the middle and explains part of the pathway from one variable to another. For example, instead of saying boredom is linked with fear of missing out, mediation asks, does boredom increase attachment anxiety, which increases fear of missing out? If that middle variable explains that connection, we say that attachment anxiety mediates the relationship. That is to say, Boredom not only can predict fear of missing out, but the relationship can also be explained by a second variable, which would be attachment anxiety that it works through. Collectively, this study aimed to determine if fear of missing out isn't just about feeling bad, but it's about what happens when a negative emotion meets an idle, wandering mind in an anxious attachment system. Now on to the methods. So we recruited 450 adults from across the United States using Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is a great side hustle for some individuals. Basically, you get paid to complete research studies for people, which helps people like me collect our research very fast. The average age was the mid-30s, and there was a diverse sample in terms of gender, education, and geographical region of the country. So it wasn't just people from one specific area of the country, it was a pretty good nationwide sample. Participants completed validated psychometric questionnaires measuring attachment anxiety, boredom proneness, anxiety, depression, and fear of missing out. So the authors of this study used structural equation modeling. Structural equation modeling allows researchers to test complex pathways, examine mediation, reduce measurement error, and compare competing theoretical models. This is important because the study isn't just asking if the variables are related, but how they influence each other. Now on to the results. Higher anxiety and depression predicted greater boredom proneness. This suggests that negative mood states don't automatically lead to FOMO, they first increase cognitive restlessness. Boredom proneness strongly predicted attachment anxiety. When people aren't cognitively engaged, attachment-related fears become more accessible, especially the fear of exclusion and abandonment. Next, we found attachment anxiety was a direct and strong predictor of fear of missing out. People who fear abandonment are more likely to interpret social information, especially online, as evident that they're being left out. Now, some of the most important results were the results pertaining to mediation. So, we found the relationship between both anxiety and FOMO and depression and FOMO were both mediated by boredom proneness. So this suggests that individuals' anxious or depressive states do not directly cause FOMO, rather they work through the variable of how bored the individuals are. So if you are more bored, those anxious thoughts are going to be more likely to attribute to the fear of missing out you experience, and the same would be said with your depressive thoughts are more likely to attribute to your fear of missing out. The relationship between boredom proneness and fear of missing out was mediated by attachment anxiety. So what this means is within this specific model, we also predicted that boredom proneness would predict fear of missing out independently, which it did. So boredom proneness does cause people to experience fear of missing out, but also from another angle, boredom proneness works through the mechanisms of attachment anxiety to cause individuals to experience fear of missing out. So collectively, fear of missing out emerges not simply from distress, but how distress interacts with boredom and attachment systems. A mind that is idle is more susceptible to fear of missing out due to attachment anxiety. Now on to the discussion. Fear of missing out isn't just a social media problem. It is not a personality flaw or a symptom of anxiety. It is a psychological state that emerges when emotional needs are not met. The mind is understimulated and attachment fears are activated. Boredom creates mental bandwidth for rumination. If your attachment style is already sensitive to rejection, boredom gives those fears room to grow. This explains why fear of missing out spikes during idle moments. Scrolling increases fear of missing out rather than relieving it. Distraction sometimes reduces fear of missing out more effectively than reassurance. This study extends attachment theory by showing that attachment systems aren't only activated by relationships. They are also activated by cognitive states, such as boredom. This is a big theoretical contribution. Some practical implications include, if fear of missing out is driven by boredom and attachment anxiety, constant reassurance will not fix it. More social media will not fix it. What does it help? Meaningful cognitive engagement, purposeful activity, secure attachment strategies, and reducing idle compulsive checking. So essentially what this means is that the best way to avoid fear of missing out is by working through the avenues of boredom and attachment anxiety. You can either A, relieve your attachment anxiety, or B, you can relieve your boredom. So in other words, by doing things that are cognitively engaging, you are going to be less susceptible to fear of missing out, as you would not be missing out because you would be already having an enjoyable experience in the first place. So the big picture. Fear of missing out isn't about missing out on events. It's about missing emotional regulation, security, and cognitive fulfillment. If you found this breakdown interesting, consider subscribing to Social Psychology Now, where we translate real research into insights about everyday life. And in the comments below, please report, when do you notice your FOMO is strongest? Thanks again for watching and have an elite day. We'll see you next time.